Ruby didn't know the woman screaming behind the flames. She just knew someone was dying. So she ran in. But the woman clinging to her on the scorched lawn, gasping and trembling, wasn't just anyone. She was Madame Park Min-ji, the untouchable matriarch whose word could end empires, whose son ruled Korea's underworld with an iron fist. And now, with ash on her face and Ruby's hands still wrapped around hers, Madame Park whispered 6 words that changed everything. "Please, dear child, marry my son." Ruby's brain couldn't process it. Not the words. Not the woman. Not the inferno still roaring behind them, consuming the east wing of the Kwan estate like it was made of paper. Her lungs burned. Her hands throbbed where the glass had cut through her uniform jacket. She could still feel the heat on her face, the choking smoke, the weight of Madame Park's body as she dragged her through the shattered window. I don't understand," Ruby stammered, her voice raw. Madame Park's grip tightened. Even now, covered in soot, her silk blouse torn, there was something regal about her. Something that made Ruby feel impossibly small. "You saved my life. You didn't hesitate. You didn't ask who I was or what you'd get. You just acted. Anyone would've." "No." The matriarch's eyes were fierce, glistening. "No one did. My guards ran the wrong direction. My staff froze. But you," her voice cracked. "You ran toward the fire." Ruby wanted to say it was instinct, that she didn't think, that she was just doing her job. But the words wouldn't come, because the truth was simpler and more terrifying. She'd heard someone screaming, and she couldn't just stand there. The wail of sirens cut through the night. Fire trucks, ambulances, and then, cutting through it all, the low growl of an engine that made every staff member within earshot go rigid. A black sedan pulled up to the lawn, tires cutting through the manicured grass without hesitation. The door opened before the car fully stopped. Kwon Ji-sub stepped out. Ruby had seen him exactly twice in the 3 months she'd worked at the estate. Both times from a distance. Both times, she'd made herself invisible, the way cleaning staff were supposed to. But now there was nowhere to hide. He was tall, sharp-jawed, dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than her yearly salary. His eyes swept over the burning wing with cold precision, then landed on his mother. "Yama." His voice was controlled, but Ruby heard the edge underneath. "Jisaba." Madame Park released one of Ruby's hands to reach toward her son. "I'm fine. Thanks to this young woman." His gaze shifted to Ruby. It was like being pinned by a blade, sharp, assessing, and utterly without warmth. She became acutely aware of her torn uniform, her bleeding hands, the ash smeared across her cheeks. "Who are you?" His English was perfect, unaccented. "Ruby Hayes, sir. I'm on the cleaning staff." "She saved me," Madame Park interjected. "She pulled me out through the window when the door was blocked. She risked her life." Something flickered in Ji-sub's expression. Not gratitude. Something colder. "You shouldn't have been in that wing." Ruby's stomach dropped. "I heard there were sounds and The East Wing was off limits tonight." He turned to one of his men, who'd appeared like shadows from the second car. "Why was staff in a restricted area?" "Sir, I can explain," an older man in a suit began. Later, Ji-sub's attention returned to his mother, and his voice softened by a fraction. "You're hurt." "Minor. This child took the worst of it." Madame Park gestured to Ruby's hands, now dripping blood onto the grass. Ji-sub's jaw tightened. He looked at Ruby again, and this time she saw something else beneath the ice. "Calculation. You'll be compensated for your injuries. Generously. My assistant will arrange transport to a private hospital." "I don't need." "Ji-sub." Madame Park's voice cut through Ruby's protest like a knife. "This woman is my savior. I owe her a life debt, and it will be paid." "No." The matriarch stood, wobbling slightly. Ji-sub moved to steady her, but she waved him off. "You don't understand. This woman, this brave soul, she ran into fire for me. Without thought. Without fear. That is not something you pay with money." Ruby felt the weight of every eye on the lawn turn toward her. Staff. Guards. Men in dark suits with hard faces. "Yama, you're in shock," Ji-sub said carefully. I am perfectly lucid. Madam Park turned back to Ruby, and there was something almost desperate in her expression. I told you, child. You are the one. You are exactly who my son needs. Mother enough. She is pure. She is brave. She is a stranger. G-Sub's voice went cold again. Who was in a restricted wing during a targeted attack. The words hung in the air like smoke. Targeted attack. Ruby's blood went cold. You think I think you're very lucky my mother is fond of you. G-Sub stepped closer, and Ruby fought the urge to back away. Because right now you're either a witness or a suspect. Either way, you're not leaving. G-Sub. Madam Park's voice was sharp. She saw something. Or she's part of it. Until I know which, she stays where I can see her. He gestured to his men. Take her to the West Wing guest quarters. Post guards. No one in or out without my approval. This is insane, Ruby whispered. I just helped. You just became involved in something much bigger than you understand. G-Sub's eyes held hers. Consider this protection. Or house arrest. The distinction doesn't matter right now. 2 guards moved toward her. Ruby looked at Madam Park, desperate for intervention, but the older woman simply smiled, sad and knowing. It's fate, child, she said softly. You'll see. As the guards led Ruby away from the burning estate, she looked back once. G-Sub was speaking rapidly into a phone, his free hand on his mother's shoulder. The flames painted them both in shades of orange and shadow. Ruby had saved a life tonight. She had no idea she'd just lost her own. The guest quarters were nicer than Ruby's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the gardens. Silk sheets on a bed big enough for 4 people. A bathroom with heated floors and a shower that had more settings than her car. If it weren't for the 2 stone-faced guards outside her door, she might have thought this was some kind of reward. But it wasn't. It was a gilded cage. Ruby sat on the edge of the bed, her hands now properly bandaged by a doctor who'd appeared, treated her burns without a word, and vanished just as silently. The cuts weren't deep, but they stung. Everything stung. Her lungs still felt tight from the smoke. Her head throbbed, and she couldn't leave. She'd tried once, about 20 minutes after they'd brought her here. She'd opened the door, and both guards had turned to face her with expressions that said try it without saying a word. She'd closed the door. Now it was past midnight. The estate was quiet except for the distant sound of voices. Men shouting orders, car engines, the organized chaos of people trying to contain a crisis. Ruby pulled her knees to her chest. This was insane. She should be at home. She should be filing a police report. She should be anywhere but here, in a dead woman's clothes, because someone had removed her ruined uniform and left a silk pajama set that definitely didn't belong to her. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Before she could respond, the door opened. Madam Park stepped inside, now changed into clean clothes, her hair pulled back. She looked smaller somehow without the chaos and flames as backdrop. But her eyes were just as sharp. May I sit? Ruby nodded, not trusting her voice. Madam Park settled into the chair by the window with a grace that made Ruby feel clumsy just watching. You must think we're monsters. I think I'm being held against my will. You're being protected. The older woman's voice was gentle but firm. The fire wasn't an accident, Ruby. It was arson. A message sent by people who want to hurt my family. And you were there. You saw things. Maybe not consciously, but you were in that wing before it burned. Ruby's throat tightened. I didn't see anyone. I heard screaming and I know. Madam Park reached over and patted her hand. I know you're innocent, child. But my son cannot afford to make assumptions. Not in his world. The moment you pulled me from that fire, you became part of something dangerous. I didn't ask for this. No one ever does. There was something sad in Madam Park's smile. But here we are. And I meant what I said on that lawn. You saved my life. That means something in my family. It means everything. Ruby shook her head. The marriage thing, that was just shock. You don't actually. I meant every word. Madam Park's voice sharpened. Do you know what I saw when you pulled me through that window? Not fear. Not hesitation. I saw a woman who acts when others freeze, who runs toward danger instead of away from it. That's rare, Ruby. Especially in a world where everyone wants something from you. I don't want anything from you, Ruby said quietly. Exactly. Madam Park stood, moving to the window. The burned wing was visible from here, still smoking. My son is a good man beneath all the ice. But he's been cold for so long, he's forgotten how to thaw. He needs someone like you. Someone who doesn't want his power or his money. Someone who just sees him. Ruby didn't know what to say to that. She didn't see G-Sub. She barely knew him. All she'd seen tonight was a man who looked at her like a problem to be solved. Get some rest, Madam Park said, heading for the door. Tomorrow will be difficult. The investigators will want to speak with you. My son will want answers. But you're safe here. I promise you that. For how long? The question stopped Madam Park at the threshold. She turned back, and for a moment she looked tired. Old. Until we find who set that fire. Until we're certain you're not in danger. She paused. Until my stubborn son realizes what I already know. What's that? That you're exactly what this family needs. She smiled. Sleep, child. Tomorrow, everything changes. The door closed softly behind her. Ruby sat in the silence, her mind racing. Everything already had changed. 6 hours ago, she'd been invisible. A janitor. Someone who cleaned up messes and went home unnoticed. Now she was trapped in a Mafia estate, branded as either a witness or a suspect, and somehow engaged, or claimed, by a woman whose word could apparently move mountains. She moved to the window, staring out at the grounds. Security had tripled. She could see men patrolling, talking into radios, checking the perimeter. This wasn't just a house. It was a fortress. And she was locked inside it. A different kind of movement caught her eye. On the terrace below, a figure stood alone, phone pressed to his ear. Even from here, she recognized the sharp line of G-Sub's shoulders, the way he held himself like every muscle was coiled tight. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Their eyes met across the distance. Ruby's breath caught. Even from stories apart, the intensity of his stare was physical. He didn't look away. Neither did she. It felt like a challenge, like he was daring her to be afraid. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of what he represented. The life he lived. The danger that followed him like a shadow. But she didn't look away. Finally, G-Sub turned back to his phone call, dismissing her as easily as breathing. Ruby stepped back from the window, her heart pounding. Madam Park was wrong. Ruby wasn't what this family needed. She was a janitor who'd made one impulsive decision, and now she was paying for it in ways she couldn't even comprehend yet. She climbed into the too-soft bed, pulled the silk sheets up to her chin, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, everything would change. She just didn't know if she'd survive it. Ruby woke to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to close and the sound of voices arguing in rapid Korean outside her door. She sat up, disoriented. For a moment, she'd forgotten where she was. Then reality crashed back. The estate. The fire. The cold-eyed Mafia boss who'd locked her in a guest room like a prisoner. The arguing stopped abruptly. A knock, sharper than Madam Park's. "Come in," Ruby called, her voice still rough from smoke. A woman in her 50s entered, dressed in a crisp uniform, carrying a tray. Behind her, one of the guards stood at attention. The woman's expression was neutral, professional, but Ruby caught the flicker of curiosity in her eyes. "Good morning, Miss Hayes. I'm Mrs. Cho, the head housekeeper. I've brought breakfast." She set the tray on the desk, rice, soup, grilled fish, banchan. More food than Ruby normally ate in a day. "Madam Park requests that you join her in the South Garden at 10 o'clock. Am I allowed to leave this room?" Mrs. Cho's expression softened slightly. "The guards will escort you anywhere within the main house and gardens. You're not to leave the property. So still a prisoner. Just one with walking privileges." After Mrs. Cho left, Ruby ate mechanically, her mind elsewhere. She needed a plan. She needed to figure out how to get out of here. But even as she thought it, Madam Park's words echoed. "You're not safe. You saw something." Had she? Ruby replayed the moments before the fire. She'd been finishing the West Wing bathrooms, her last task of the shift. She'd heard something, voices maybe, coming from the East Wing. She'd thought it was odd since that area was supposed to be empty, but she'd minded her business. Until she'd smelled smoke. At exactly 10, the guards led her through the estate. In daylight, it was even more overwhelming. Priceless art on every wall. Marble floors that gleamed. Staff members who stopped and stared as she passed, whispering. The South Garden was an oasis of carefully manicured beauty. Madame Park sat at a wrought iron table beneath a pergola covered in wisteria, tea service laid out before her. "Ruby, come, sit." She gestured to the chair across from her. "You look better. Did you sleep?" "A little." Ruby sat stiffly. "Mrs. Cho said you wanted to see me. I wanted to have tea with you." "Is that so strange?" Madame Park poured tea into delicate cups. "You saved my life. The least I can do is share a proper meal with you." Ruby accepted the cup, uncertain. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Madame Park said, "My son's investigators will want to interview you this afternoon. They'll ask about everything you saw and heard before the fire. Just tell the truth. You have nothing to hide. And after that, what happens to me? That depends on what they find." Madame Park's voice was gentle. "But I won't let anything happen to you, child. You have my word." Ruby wanted to believe her. But promises from the mother of a crime lord felt like writing on water. "I should get back to work," Ruby said suddenly. I know I can't leave, but I can't just sit in that room. I'll go crazy. Let me help the staff. I can clean, organize, whatever needs doing." Madame Park studied her for a long moment. "You want to work? I need to do something." "I'm not." Ruby gestured at the opulent garden, the tea service, everything. "I'm not made for sitting still." A slow smile spread across Madame Park's face. "You really are remarkable. Most people in your position would be demanding lawyers, making threats, or crying. But you want to work. It's what I know how to do." "Very well. I'll speak with Mrs. Cho." "But Ruby..." Madame Park reached across the table, covering Ruby's hand with her own. "You're not staff anymore. You're my guest. My son may not understand that yet, but he will." For the next 3 days, Ruby found a rhythm in the chaos. She worked alongside the housekeeping staff, ignoring their shocked whispers. She cleaned the undamaged sections of the estate, organized supply closets, helped in ways that made Mrs. Cho shake her head but eventually accept. The guards followed her everywhere, silent shadows, but Ruby learned to ignore them too. She saw Jisub only in passing. He was always on a phone, always surrounded by stern-faced men, always moving with that controlled urgency that made everyone step aside. He never looked at her. Or if he did, it was the kind of look you give furniture, acknowledging its existence without really seeing it. It shouldn't have bothered her. It did. On the 3rd night, Ruby couldn't sleep. The guest room felt suffocating. She slipped out. The night guards had learned she wasn't a flight risk and wandered the halls. The estate was different at night. Quieter. The shadows deeper. She found herself in the library without meaning to. It was massive, 2 stories of books with a spiral staircase and leather chairs that looked older than she was. A single lamp burned in the corner. Jisub sat in one of the chairs, jacket discarded, tie loosened, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Can't sleep?" His voice was different without the cold edge. "Just tired." "No. You." "I don't sleep much." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit if you want." Ruby hesitated, then sat. This close, she could see the exhaustion etched into his face. The tension in his jaw. He looked human suddenly. "Fallible." "They cleared you," he said after a moment. "The investigators. You didn't set the fire. You weren't working with anyone. You were just there. Just there." He took a drink. "Wrong place, wrong time. So I can leave?" Something flickered in his expression. "No." "Why not?" "Because the people who set that fire saw you pull my mother out. They know your face now. And that makes you a target." Ruby's stomach dropped. "That's not my fault." "No." It's mine. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Ruby saw something beneath the ice. Guilt. My world. My enemies. My responsibility. You got caught in the crossfire, and now I have to keep you alive. I don't want your protection. You don't have a choice. He stood, setting down his glass. Neither do I. He walked past her toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, thank you. For saving her. Ruby turned, but he was already gone, leaving only the faint smell of expensive cologne and whiskey behind. She sat in the library until dawn, wondering how saving one life had cost her everything. Ruby was dusting the second-floor hallway when she heard the voices. It had been a week since the library encounter. A week of careful distance. G-Sub barely acknowledging her existence. Ruby throwing herself into work to avoid thinking about her trapped situation. But something had shifted that night. She'd seen beneath his armor, if only for a moment. The voices were coming from G-Sub's office. The door was slightly ajar. Becoming a liability, sir. Ruby froze, her hand still on the decorative vase she'd been cleaning. That was Mr. Kong, one of G-Sub's senior advisors. She'd seen him around, 50s, expensive suits, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Explain. G-Sub's voice was cold. The girl. Hayes. She's a distraction. Your mother has grown attached, and now the staff treats her like some kind of… Kong paused, searching for words. Mascot. It's inappropriate. More than that, it's dangerous. Ruby's heart hammered. She should leave. She shouldn't be listening to this. But her feet wouldn't move. Dangerous how? She's an outsider who's seen too much. She knows the layout of the estate. She's watched our security patterns. And every day she's here, she becomes a bigger target. Kang's voice dropped lower. If our enemies can't get to Madam Park, they'll settle for the woman who saved her. Use her as leverage. She's guarded. Guards can be killed. A pause. There's a simpler solution, sir. One that removes the risk entirely. The silence stretched so long Ruby thought her breathing would give her away. You're suggesting I eliminate her. G-Sub's voice was flat, emotionless. I'm suggesting you consider all options. She's a loose end. And in our world, loose ends get people killed. Kang's tone turned almost paternal. I know your mother has become fond of the girl. But sentimentality is a luxury we can't afford. Not with everything that's happening. Ruby's hand trembled, nearly knocking over the vase. She caught it, but the sound, the tiny scrape of porcelain, was too loud in the quiet hallway. The voices inside stopped. Footsteps approached the door. Ruby abandoned the cleaning cart and walked quickly toward the staircase, trying to look purposeful, like she'd been heading somewhere and hadn't heard a thing. Miss Hayes. Kang's voice stopped her at the top of the stairs. She turned slowly. He stood in the doorway, G-Sub visible behind him at his desk. Both men watched her with different expressions. Kong with poorly concealed irritation, G-Sub with unreadable stone. Yes, sir? Ruby kept her voice steady. The second floor is being cleaned? Kang's smile was thin. Yes, sir. I can come back later if… That won't be necessary. He glanced at G-Sub. We were just finishing. Kong brushed past her, heading down the stairs with the confidence of a man who'd made his point. Ruby stood frozen, unsure whether to leave or stay or explain or… Ruby. She looked up. G-Sub stood in the office doorway. Come here. It wasn't a request. Ruby's legs felt like lead as she walked toward him. He stepped back, allowing her into the office, then closed the door behind her. The room was all dark wood and leather, walls lined with books and a massive desk that looked like it cost more than her car. G-Sub moved behind the desk, putting that barrier between them. How much did you hear? No point lying. Enough. His jaw tightened. Then you know you're at risk. I know your advisor wants me dead. Kong is pragmatic. In his position, I might suggest the same. Ruby's blood ran cold. Are you going to kill me? No. The word was immediate, almost harsh. G-Sub leaned forward, hands flat on the desk. But he's not wrong about the danger. Every day you're here, you become more of a target. And despite what my mother believes, you're not trained for this world. You're not equipped to survive it. Then let me go. Give me money to disappear. I'll move cities, change my name. They have your face, your fingerprints, your entire history. G-Sub's voice was tired. There's nowhere you could go that they couldn't find you eventually. At least here, I can protect you. By keeping me prisoner? By keeping you alive. He straightened, running a hand through his hair. The first truly frustrated gesture she'd seen from him. Do you think I want this? Do you think I enjoy having a civilian stuck in my home, becoming attached to my mother, complicating every security protocol? No one asked you to save me. You saved her first. The words came out sharper than he seemed to intend. That made you my responsibility, whether either of us likes it or not. Ruby's hands clenched at her sides. I'm not a responsibility. I'm a person. In my world, those things aren't mutually exclusive. G-Sub moved around the desk, closer to her. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. I know you're frightened. I know this isn't the life you chose. But running will get you killed. Staying gives you a chance. A chance at what? Spending the rest of my life hiding in your estate. A chance to live long enough that we can end this threat. His voice dropped. I'm working on it, Ruby. Finding who ordered the fire, eliminating the danger. But it takes time, and until then. A sharp knock interrupted him. One of the guards opened the door without waiting for permission, his face tense. Sir, we have a situation. G-Sub's entire demeanor shifted, the exhausted man disappearing behind the cold boss. What kind of situation? Package delivered to the south gate. Addressed to Miss Hayes. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Show me. They moved quickly through the estate, G-Sub, Ruby, the guard, and two others who materialized from nowhere. Outside, a small crowd had gathered near the gate. Bomb squad was already there, Ruby realized with creeping horror. The package sat on a table in the guardhouse, x-rayed and photographed. A simple brown box with her name written in neat black letters. G-Sub pulled on gloves, opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph. Ruby's breath caught. It was her, walking in the estate gardens, taken from outside the walls. The angle was clear. Someone had been watching. Waiting. Written across the bottom in red marker. Pretty bird in a cage. G-Sub's hands tightened on the photo, crumpling the edges. When he looked at her, his eyes were black with fury. Double the guard on her. No one goes in or out without my personal approval. He turned to Ruby, and beneath the anger, she saw something else. Fear. From now on, you don't leave the main house. You don't go near windows. You don't exist outside these walls. Understand? Ruby nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Someone wasn't just watching her. The lockdown lasted 3 days. Ruby barely saw sunlight. The main house became her entire world. Hallways she'd memorized, rooms she'd cleaned 100 times, now feeling like walls closing in. Guards stood at every corner. Windows were covered. Madam Park visited daily, bringing tea and conversation, but even she couldn't hide the worry in her eyes. G-Sub disappeared into meetings, into phone calls, into the kind of dark work Ruby tried not to imagine. When she did see him, it was always from a distance, a glimpse of his sharp profile, the tension in his shoulders, the way everyone moved faster when he entered a room. On the third night, Ruby couldn't take it anymore. She was in the conservatory, one of the few places she was still allowed, watering plants because Mrs. Cho had finally stopped trying to make her rest. The room was glass and greenery, moonlight filtering through the panels overhead. Beautiful and suffocating all at once. She heard the footsteps behind her and knew without turning who it was. You should be in your room. G-Sub's voice was rough, like he hadn't slept in days. So should you. Ruby set down the watering can, turning to face him. He looked terrible, tie gone, shirt wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes that made him look almost human. Have you eaten anything today? I don't need. Everyone needs to eat, G-Sub. She moved past him toward the small table where Mrs. Cho had left a tea service earlier. Sit down before you fall down. For a moment, she thought he'd refuse. Then, surprising her, he sank into one of the wicker chairs like his strings had been cut. Ruby poured tea, added sugar the way she'd seen him take it in the library, and handed him the cup. He took it, studying her. "You're not afraid." "Of you?" "No. You should be. Everyone else is. Everyone else doesn't see you at 3 in the morning, looking like you're carrying the world." Ruby sat across from him. "I'm terrified of your world. But not of you." Something shifted in his expression. Softened. "You're strange, Ruby Hayes. So I've been told." She paused. "Have you found them? The people who sent the photo?" "We're close. Following leads, applying pressure in the right places." He took a drink, wincing slightly. "It's a rival faction. Lee's people. They think if they can hurt my mother or anyone connected to her, they'll expose weakness. Make me vulnerable." "Are you vulnerable?" His eyes met hers over the rim of the cup. "More than I've been in years." The admission hung between them, heavy with meaning. Ruby's heart beat faster. G-sub. The explosion shattered the moment. The conservatory's far wall erupted in fire and glass. Ruby screamed as G-sub lunged across the table, slamming into her, knocking them both to the ground. His body covered hers as debris rained down, heat washing over them in waves. Then gunfire. Sharp, rapid cracks that made Ruby's ears ring. "Stay down." G-sub's voice was in her ear, his weight pinning her to the floor. She could feel his heart hammering against her back, feel his breath hot against her neck. More gunfire. Shouts. The sound of running feet. G-sub's hand found hers in the chaos, squeezing once, reassurance or goodbye, Ruby couldn't tell. Then he was moving, pulling her up, half dragging her toward the interior door. Guards materialized, forming a human shield around them. The world was smoke and sound and terror. They made it to the hallway. G-sub shoved her toward his men. "Get her to the safe room." "Now." "Sir, you need to." "I said now." But before they could move, a figure emerged from the smoke. A man in black, gun raised, aimed directly at Ruby. Everything slowed down. G-sub moved without thinking, without hesitation. He stepped between Ruby and the gun, his own weapon appearing in his hand like magic. The shots came simultaneously, 2 cracks that sounded like the end of the world. The man fell. G-sub stumbled. "No." Ruby caught him as his knees buckled. Blood bloomed across his shoulder, spreading fast. "No, no, no. I'm fine." But his voice was tight with pain. "You're shot." Ruby pressed her hands against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Her hands, the same hands that had pulled his mother from fire, now slick with his blood. "You stupid, stupid. Why did you do that?" "Because he was aiming at you." G-sub's eyes found hers, unfocused but intense. "Because I couldn't. I won't lose you." Guards swarmed around them. Someone was calling for a doctor. Someone else was securing the perimeter. But Ruby couldn't look away from G-sub's face, from the way he was staring at her like she was the only thing keeping him conscious. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough." His hand, bloody and shaking, reached up to touch her face. "I know you run toward fire. I know you water plants at midnight because you need to feel useful. I know you're terrified but too stubborn to show it. I know," his breath hitched. "I know losing you would break something in me I didn't know could still break. G-sub, for weeks, I've been telling myself you're just an obligation. A debt to repay. A problem to solve." His thumb brushed her cheek, leaving a streak of red. "But that's a lie. You're the first thing I think about when I wake up. The last thing before I sleep. You're..." "Sir." The doctor arrived, trying to pull Ruby away. "Don't." G-sub's grip on her tightened. "Let her stay." They worked on him right there in the hallway, Ruby's hand in his the whole time. His blood soaked into her clothes, into her skin, marking her with proof that this was real. That he'd taken a bullet meant for her. That she wasn't just a responsibility anymore. She was something more. "I'm scared," Ruby admitted softly, as the doctor bandaged his shoulder. "Not of dying. Of this. Of feeling things I shouldn't feel for someone like you. Someone like me." G-sub's laugh was bitter, pained. "A monster who lives in darkness? Someone I can't protect." Her voice cracked. You took that bullet like it was nothing. Like your life doesn't matter as much as mine. And it does, G-Sub. It matters to your mother. To your people. She squeezed his hand. To me. The confession settled between them like a living thing. Ruby. The threat's neutralized, sir. A guard appeared, breathless. Lee's people. 3 men down. We got them all. G-Sub nodded, but he didn't look away from Ruby. Even through the pain, even through the chaos, his eyes held hers. Take me to my room, he ordered. Then, quieter, to Ruby. Come with me. Please. She did. She followed him through blood-stained hallways to his private quarters, helped him sit on the edge of his bed while the doctor finished his work. And when everyone finally left them alone, when it was just her and him and the truth they could no longer deny, G-Sub pulled her close with his good arm and whispered against her hair. You're not leaving. Not because I'm making you stay, but because I'm asking. Stay with me, Ruby. Choose this. Choose me. Ruby closed her eyes, breathing him in blood and smoke and something underneath that was just him. Okay, she whispered back. Okay. Ruby woke in G-Sub's bed. Not beside him. He'd insisted she take the bed while he took the couch, despite his injury. But she'd fallen asleep to the sound of his breathing, to the knowledge that he was close, alive, real. That they'd both survived the night. Dawn light filtered through the curtains. Ruby sat up, immediately looking toward the couch. It was empty. Panic flared until she heard water running in the bathroom. Moments later, G-Sub emerged, freshly showered, his shoulder rebandaged. He was dressed in a crisp black suit despite the early hour, despite nearly dying 12 hours ago. You should be resting, Ruby said. I have work to do. But his voice was gentler than usual. He moved to the bed, sitting on the edge near her. How did you sleep? Better than you, apparently. She gestured at his shoulder. Does it hurt? I've had worse. His hand found hers on the blanket, fingers intertwining. Ruby, about last night. Don't you dare take it back. A small smile tugged at his lips. I wasn't going to. I was going to say I need to handle something today. Something you should probably witness. What kind of something? His expression hardened. The kind that makes sure no one ever questions your place here again. An hour later, Ruby found herself in the estate's main conference room, standing slightly behind G-Sub as his top lieutenants filed in. 20 men, maybe more. All dangerous. All watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Mr. Kong was among them, his face carefully neutral. Madam Park sat at the far end of the table, a knowing smile on her lips. Thank you for coming on short notice. G-Sub's voice carried absolute authority. He stood at the head of the table, Ruby close enough to touch. His injured shoulder showed no weakness in his posture. Last night, Lee's faction made another attempt. They failed. 3 of their men are dead. But the attempt itself demands we address a larger issue. Murmurs rippled through the room. Kong leaned forward. Sir, if I may, the security breach should be our priority. How they got through our defenses has already been handled. G-Sub's voice cut like a blade. That's not why you're here. You're here because I'm making something clear. Something that should have been clear from the beginning, but apparently needs to be stated explicitly. Ruby's heart pounded. She felt every eye in the room shift to her. Miss Hayes. Kang's voice was carefully respectful. With all due respect, perhaps she should wait outside while we discuss. No. G-Sub's hand moved to the small of Ruby's back, a possessive gesture that made her skin tingle. She stays. This concerns her directly. The room went silent. For weeks now I've heard whispers, G-Sub continued. Concerns about Miss Hayes. Questions about why she's here. Suggestions about how to handle the problem she represents. His gaze landed on Kong, sharp as a knife. Last week, someone in this room suggested I eliminate her entirely. Kong went pale. Let me be absolutely clear. G-Sub's voice dropped to something deadly. Ruby Hayes is not a problem. She is not a liability. She is not a temporary guest or a loose end to be tied up. He pulled Ruby forward, his arm wrapping around her waist, claiming her in front of everyone. She is mine. The word hung in the air like a declaration of war. Sir, Kong started. I'm not finished. G-Sub's eyes swept the room. Ruby saved my mother's life. She took burns and cuts, pulling her from a burning building when my guards failed to act. She has shown more courage, more loyalty, more honor in one moment than some of you have shown in years. Ruby could barely breathe. His arm was solid around her, anchoring her. Last night, she was nearly killed because of her connection to this family. And last night, I took a bullet that was meant for her. G-Sub's voice roughened. I would take 100 more. Because she is not just my mother's savior. She is the woman I have chosen. The woman who will stand beside me. The woman who, if any of you touch, threaten, or disrespect in any way, will be the last mistake you ever make. The threat was explicit. Undeniable. Do I make myself clear? A chorus of yes, sir, echoed through the room. Good. G-Sub's arm tightened around Ruby. From this moment forward, Ruby Hayes is under my personal protection. An attack on her is an attack on me. An insult to her is an insult to me. She has the authority to move freely within this estate, to speak with any of you, to make decisions regarding household matters. And anyone who has a problem with that can leave. Now, no one moved. Kong cleared his throat. Sir, I apologize if my previous suggestions caused offense. I was merely trying to protect me by suggesting I kill an innocent woman. G-Sub's voice was ice. Your pragmatism is noted, Kong. So is your lack of judgment. We'll discuss your future in private. Kang's face went from pale to gray. Now, G-Sub looked at his mother. I believe there's another matter to address. Madam Park stood, moving around the table with grace despite her age. In her hands, she carried a small jade box. Ruby recognized it. She dusted it a dozen times in Madam Park's sitting room. This, Madam Park said, opening the box, has been in the Quan family for 6 generations, passed from mother to daughter-in-law for over 200 years. Inside lay a jade pendant, carved with intricate symbols, hung on a delicate gold chain. It was beautiful, ancient, priceless. Madam Park lifted it from the box. Ruby Hayes, you saved my life. You have shown yourself to be brave, selfless, and true. And more than that, she glanced at her son with warm eyes. You have done what I thought impossible. You made my son remember he has a heart. Ruby's eyes burned. This pendant represents acceptance into our family. It means you are one of us, protected by us, cherished by us. Madam Park stepped forward, fastening the necklace around Ruby's neck. The jade settled against her collarbone, warm despite its stone nature. Welcome home, daughter. The room erupted in applause. Not enthusiastic, perhaps. Some reluctant. But everyone clapped. Everyone acknowledged. Madam Park kissed both of Ruby's cheeks. I told you it was fate, she whispered. When Ruby turned back to G-Sub, she found him watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. Soft. Open. Almost vulnerable. He took her hand in front of everyone. Mine, he repeated, quieter this time. Just for her. Ruby squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of the jade against her skin, the warmth of his palm, the eyes of his entire organization on them both. Yours, she whispered back. The meeting dissolved into logistics, security upgrades, retaliation plans, the boring machinery of running a criminal empire. But G-Sub kept her hand the whole time, his thumb tracing circles on her wrist. Later, when the room had finally emptied except for them and Madam Park, Ruby touched the pendant at her throat. This is real. This is actually happening. Having second thoughts? G-Sub asked. Terrified thoughts. But not second ones. She met his eyes. I chose this. I chose you. Then you're braver than any soldier I've ever commanded. He pulled her close, mindful of his injured shoulder, and rested his forehead against hers. I don't deserve you, Ruby Hayes. Probably not, she agreed, making him laugh, a real laugh, unpracticed and genuine. But you're stuck with me anyway. Promise? She kissed him then, soft and sure, with his mother watching and approving and the weight of 200 years of family history around her neck. Promise. 1 year later. Ruby stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the jade pendant that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. The guest room, her room, had changed over the months. Personal touches everywhere now. Photos on the dresser. Books she'd been reading stacked on the nightstand. A life built in spaces that once felt like a prison. "You look beautiful." She turned to find Madame Park in the doorway, elegant in a navy hanbok, her eyes soft with affection. "I'm just wearing jeans and a blouse," Ruby laughed. "I'm not talking about the clothes." Madame Park entered, taking Ruby's hands. "You're glowing. Happy. That's what makes you beautiful." Ruby squeezed her hands. Over the past year, Madame Park had become more than the woman she'd saved. She'd become family. A mother figure Ruby had never really had. "Thank you. For everything. For accepting me when I was just the bravest woman I'd ever met." Madame Park smiled. "You were never just anything, child. I knew that the moment you pulled me from those flames." A knock interrupted them. Mrs. Cho appeared, slightly flustered. "Miss Hayes, Mr. Kwan requests your presence in the South Garden." Ruby's heart skipped. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is perfect." Mrs. Cho's usually stern face broke into a rare smile. "Trust me." Ruby walked through the estate with familiar ease now. She knew every hallway, every room, every secret corner. But more than that, she knew the people. The staff who'd once whispered about her now greeted her warmly. The guards nodded with respect. She'd earned her place here, not through status or fear, but through simply being herself. The South Garden had been transformed. Lanterns hung from every tree, glowing softly in the evening light. The pathway was lined with candles, leading to the center where Ruby's breath caught. The burned wing. The place where this had all started. It had been fully restored, better than before, the scorch marks and destruction erased. And in front of it stood G-Sub, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his hands in his pockets, watching her approach with eyes that held everything. Ruby walked toward him, her legs trembling slightly. She'd cleaned this garden 100 times as a janitor. Now she walked through it as something else entirely. "Hi," she said softly when she reached him. "Hi." His voice was warm, that coldness from a year ago completely gone. "Do you remember this spot?" "How could I forget? This is where your mother looked at me, covered in ash, and asked me to marry her son." G-Sub smiled. "She has excellent judgment." "Does she?" Ruby touched his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her palm. "Because that son was pretty convinced I was either a witness or a suspect. That son was an idiot." He covered her hand with his. "That son almost lost the best thing that ever happened to him because he was too afraid to admit he needed someone." Ruby's eyes burned. Over the past year, they'd built something real. Not perfect. There were still moments when his world terrified her, when the violence came too close, when she missed the simplicity of her old life. But there were more moments of this. Of him looking at her like she was his reason for breathing. Of choosing each other, every single day. "I have something to ask you," G-Sub said. "But first, I need to say something." He took both her hands, and Ruby noticed they were trembling slightly. G-Sub, who faced down rivals without flinching, who commanded an empire with absolute authority, was nervous. "A year ago, you ran into a burning building for a woman you didn't know. You could have died. You almost did. And when I met you on that lawn, covered in soot and blood, I thought you were the most foolish person I'd ever encountered." Ruby laughed through tears that were already forming. "But you weren't foolish. You were brave. And that bravery didn't stop. You stayed when anyone else would have run. You chose to see me as human when everyone else sees a monster. You watered plants at midnight and cleaned floors you didn't have to clean and made my mother laugh more than she had in years." His voice roughened. "You made me believe I could have something good. Something pure. Something worth protecting that wasn't built on fear or power." "G-Sub, I'm not easy to love," he continued. "My world is dark. It's dangerous. There will always be threats, always be risks. I can't promise you a normal life, Ruby. I can't promise you safety or simplicity." "I don't want normal," Ruby whispered. "I want you." His eyes closed for a moment, like her words were a physical relief. When they opened again, he was smiling, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. Then he dropped to one knee. Ruby's hand flew to her mouth. From his pocket, G-Sub pulled a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, a simple band of platinum with a single diamond, elegant and understated. Nothing ostentatious. Nothing that screamed wealth or power. Just beautiful. Ruby Hayes, former janitor, current love of my life. The woman who saved my mother and somehow managed to save me too. His voice was steady despite the emotion in his eyes. Will you marry me? Not because my mother asked you to. Not out of obligation or duty or debt. But because you want to. Because you choose me, knowing exactly who and what I am. Ruby dropped to her knees in front of him, not caring about the grass or her jeans or anything except getting closer to him. Yes. Yes, but only if you promise me something. Anything. Promise you'll never shut me out. No matter how dark it gets, no matter how dangerous. We face it together or not at all. Together, he agreed, his forehead touching hers. Always together. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the lantern light. Then he kissed her, soft and deep, sealing the promise they'd just made. When they pulled apart, Ruby realized they weren't alone. Madam Park stood on the terrace, tears streaming down her face, hands clasped together. Mrs. Cho beside her, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. The guards at their posts, pretending not to watch but smiling anyway. I told you, Madam Park called out. I told you it was fate. Ruby laughed, burying her face in G-Sub's shoulder. She's never going to let us forget that she called this. No, he agreed, pulling her to her feet. She's going to tell this story at our wedding. And our children's weddings. And probably our grandchildren's weddings. Children. Ruby raised an eyebrow. Eventually. If you want. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. We have time to figure it all out. Together. Together. The word felt like coming home. They walked back toward the house hand in hand, toward Madam Park, who was already planning the wedding in rapid Korean, toward a future that Ruby never could have imagined when she'd run into that burning building. She'd been invisible then. A janitor. Someone who cleaned up other people's messes and went home unnoticed. Now she was the future Mrs. Kwan, the heart of a family, the woman who'd tamed a mafia boss with nothing but courage and a kind heart. Ruby looked back once at the restored wing, at the place where everything had changed. Then she looked at G-Sub, at the man who'd taken a bullet for her, who'd claimed her in front of his entire organization, who'd just promised her forever. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For letting me save you back. His smile was answer enough. The end. Thank you so much for reading Ruby and G-Sub's story. If you enjoyed their journey from janitor and mafia boss to soulmates, please consider subscribing. I drop new stories every single day, and your support means absolutely everything to me. Each subscription helps me continue creating the romance stories you love. Until next time.